Koko the Clown, 1929-14. Strange facts. You didn't know Koko, the clown didn't quietly fade into history. In 1929, this ink-born figure stood at the edge of animation's most unstable moment, when sound disrupted timing, bodies bled into drawings, and studios chased survival over comfort. What looks playful now once felt risky, awkward, and strangely adult. Behind the rubber hose smiles were pressure, money, and creative decisions that still feel uneasy today, long after audiences stopped asking questions entirely. Fact 1. The Paramount contract that turned Koko into a deadline problem. By 1929, Koko existed inside a contract that valued volume over stability. Paramount Pictures, through its theatrical distribution agreement with Fleischer Studios, demanded a steady flow of animated shorts regardless of technical upheaval. Sound synchronization was reshaping timing, but delivery dates did not move. Max Fleischer pushed production forward, while ink and paint crews absorbed the strain. Budgets tightened as sound equipment costs rose, forcing shortcuts in staging and motion. Koko's rubber hose movement became a solution, not a style choice. The character's strange elasticity masked missing frames and uneven timing. Internal records show release schedules mattered more than refinement. The clown was no longer an experiment, he was inventory. Each short had to fit Paramount's program blocks alongside newsreels and features. Failure meant lost bookings. That pressure explains why 1929 Koko feels restless and nervously paced. The animation strains to keep up with sound cues it barely controls. The contract kept the studio alive, but it locked Koko into a race he was never designed to win, and that was only the beginning. Fact 2. Chemical Koko and the uneasy end of the Inkwell era. Chemical Koko was never meant to feel like a farewell, yet studio pressure turned it into one. Released in 1929, the short arrived as Fleischer Studios was quietly abandoning the Inkwell framework that anchored Koko to the animator's desk. Max Fleischer understood that audiences were shifting towards sound-driven animation, but Paramount Distribution still accepted silent material during the transition. The result was a strange compromise. Chemical Koko leaned on visual chaos, rapid transformations, and aggressive rubber hose motion to distract from an aging format. Ink and paint crews reused established silhouettes, while timing grew harsher and less playful. There was little room for refinement. Studio leadership prioritized clearing contractual obligations rather than protecting Koko's identity. Animation historians have noted that this short feels deliberately unmoored, as if testing how far the character could stretch before snapping. The chemistry gag framing also allowed surreal violence without narrative consequence. After its release, the Inkwell concept quietly disappeared from schedules. Koko did not evolve with sound, he was simply set aside, and that choice lingered. Fact 3. When sound arrived, timing became a trap. The studio couldn't outrun. Sound did not arrive smoothly for Koko, it arrived like a moving target. In 1929, Fleischer Studios was experimenting with synchronization, while still delivering largely silent shorts for Paramount's theatrical distribution. The problem was timing. Koko's animation relied on loose rubber hose motion and improvised staging, designed for visual rhythm rather than precise audio cues. Adding sound exposed every weakness. Frames that once felt fluid now landed early or late against music tracks. Max Fleischer pushed the studio to test sound systems, but budgets limited retakes. Ink and paint departments were instructed to conserve drawings, forcing animators to stretch actions unnaturally to hit cues. This created the uneasy, elastic pacing modern viewers notice. Animation historian Leonard Maltin later observed that early Fleischer sound experiments emphasized atmosphere over clarity. Koko's body bends, stalls, and snaps back, as if fighting the soundtrack. The character was never redesigned for sound discipline. Instead, sound was layered on top of an aging motion system. The result feels tense, mechanical, and oddly strained. Audiences noticed the difference. The studio felt it immediately, and the pressure only increased. Fact 4. The rotoscope legacy that started looking like a liability. Koko's movement was born from rotoscope innovation, but by 1929 that innovation was turning awkward. Max Fleischer's patented rotoscope process, developed years earlier, used filmed reference of real motion to guide animation frames. Dave Fleischer famously served as the physical reference for Koko's earliest movement, grounding the clown in human timing. That realism once felt magical. With sound arriving, it felt exposed. Rotoscoped motion clashed with the exaggerated elasticity demanded by synchronized shorts. Human weight did not always align with musical beats. Animators struggled to reconcile traced motion with rubber hose abstraction. Studio notes from the late Inkwell period indicate increasing frustration with stiff transitions and uncanny pauses. The process also slowed production. Rotoscoping required extra steps at a moment when Paramount schedules demanded speed. What was once a selling point became a bottleneck. Fleischer Studios quietly reduced reliance on strict rotoscope reference, blending it with freer animation to stay afloat. Koko's body began to drift away from its human anchor. That drift created the unsettling half-real, half-cartoon motion audiences still sense. The technique that defined him no longer protected him, and abandoning it came at a cost no one fully anticipated. Fact 5. The ink and paint shortcuts that kept the clown moving and hid the cost. The ink and paint department became the quiet battlefield keeping Koko on screen. By 1929, Fleischer Studios faced rising costs from sound experiments, yet Paramount delivery quotas stayed rigid. Supervisors approved shortcuts that reduced drawings without stopping motion entirely. Animators reused cycles, mirrored frames, and simplified silhouettes to preserve timing. Backgrounds flattened, details vanished, and limbs looped longer than intended. These decisions were not aesthetic rebellion, but financial survival. Ink and paint crews worked faster, sometimes tracing older cells to meet deadlines. That repetition created visual echoes modern viewers read as dreamlike. At the time, it signaled exhaustion. Studio leadership accepted the trade because theatrical distribution punished delays. Koko's rubber hose body absorbed the damage. Stretch hid missing frames. Bounce masked uneven spacing. Nothing stopped. Everything thinned. Animation historians later noted how these shortcuts shaped Fleischer's uneasy texture. The clown kept moving, but the illusion frayed at the edges. Audiences felt something was off, even if they couldn't name it. Efficiency saved the schedule, not the character's stability. The cost was invisible then, but it accumulated quickly inside frames. Fact 6. Studio leadership pressure that pushed Koko toward riskier staging. Studio leadership did not ask Koko to be stranger. Pressure made it inevitable. In 1929, Max Fleischer faced overlapping demands from Paramount distribution schedules, sound conversion costs, and internal fatigue. Dave Fleischer, overseeing direction and pacing, pushed for bolder staging to keep shorts competitive. That push collided with shrinking resources. Riskier layouts, exaggerated scale shifts, and aggressive rubber hose motion replaced polish. These choices amplified discomfort. Timing snapped abruptly to maintain momentum. Leadership framed these decisions as experimentation, but internal correspondence shows urgency, not curiosity. The studio needed attention in crowded theatrical programs dominated by novelty sound shorts. Safe animation vanished first. Koko became a testing ground because his identity was already unstable. Animators were encouraged to exaggerate until something landed. When it didn't, they moved on. There was no time to reconsider tone. This pressure explains why 1929 Koko feels louder, sharper, and less playful. The clown reflects leadership anxiety translated into motion. Risk stopped being optional. It became survival, and that strategy reshaped everything that followed afterward quietly. Fact 7. Theatrical distribution demands that shaped what Koko was allowed to be. Paramount's theatrical distribution rules quietly dictated Koko's limits in 1929. Shorts were programmed alongside newsreels, musical novelties, and early sound attractions, leaving little tolerance for slow build-up. Fleischer Studios had to deliver immediately readable motion within tight running times. Complex staging or subtle pantomime risked confusion in noisy theatres. As a result, animation emphasized bold silhouettes, rapid gags, and constant movement. Max Fleischer accepted these constraints to maintain bookings, even when they clashed with Koko's earlier experimental tone. Timing was compressed, transitions were shortened, visual density increased to survive inattentive audiences. These demands also discouraged emotional continuity between shorts. Each reel needed to stand alone and reset instantly. Koko became less a character and more a flexible unit of spectacle. Animation historian Donald Crafton later noted that distribution pressure often shaped style more than artistry in early sound-era shorts. The discomfort viewers feel today reflects that compression. Nothing lingers, everything pushes forward. The clown never rests because the program wouldn't allow it, and that external control rewired the character. Fact 8. The censorship climate that made certain frames disappear later. Koko's 1929 shorts were created before enforcement tightened, but they did not escape later scrutiny. As theatrical reissues increased in the 1930s, distributors and exhibitors quietly altered Fleischer material to fit shifting standards. Surreal transformations implied menace, and exaggerated body distortion drew attention from local censorship boards. Fleischer Studios had limited control once prints left the studio. Certain frames were trimmed, reordered, or removed entirely during reissue preparation. These were not moral edits in the modern sense, but attempts to smooth discomfort. Studio paperwork from the early 1930s shows replacement leaders and revised timing notes, suggesting changes made after original release. The result is fragmentation. Some surviving prints feel jumpy or incomplete. Koko's already unstable motion becomes more abrupt. Animation historians caution that no single definitive version of these shorts exists today. What viewers see now is often a filtered artifact shaped by later anxieties, not original intent. The censorship climate did not erase Koko, but it sanded edges unevenly. That unevenness contributes to the lingering unease modern audiences feel. The clown's rhythm was altered without his creators present, and those silent cuts still echo inside the animation. Fact 9. Social context in 1929 that made the humor feel sharper and stranger. 1929 was not a neutral year for Koko's humour. It was a tense social backdrop leaking into frames. The United States was entering economic collapse, and theatrical audiences carried anxiety into packed programs. Fleischer Studios did not address this directly, but the animation absorbed it. Gags grew harsher, transformations felt less playful and more aggressive. Rubber hose bodies stretched under invisible pressure. Max Fleischer understood that abstraction allowed commentary without statements. Surreal motion bypassed dialogue and avoided explicit references. That ambiguity was useful. It also unsettled viewers. Koko's world rarely stabilized. Objects shifted scale. Authority figures dissolved. Animation historian Richard Koczarski has written that late silent-era cartoons often reflected instability through excess motion. In 1929, that excess read differently. Laughter shared space with unease. The clown's perpetual motion mirrored an era afraid of stopping. Fleischer leadership did not frame this as social response, but timing and staging captured the mood regardless. What audiences saw as nonsense carried weight beneath the ink. That weight lingers because it was never resolved shorts. Fact 10. The rubber hose motion choices that quietly changed Koko's identity. Rubber hose motion did not simply stylize Koko in 1929, it redefined who he was allowed to be. Earlier, Inkwell shorts balanced human-derived rotoscope movement with playful distortion. Under production pressure, that balance collapsed. Animators leaned harder into elastic limbs because they solved problems quickly. Curves replaced joints. Weight became suggestion. Timing stretched to fill gaps left by reduced drawings. This motion system erased specific personality cues tied to human reference. Koko stopped feeling like a figure interacting with space and became a shape reacting to it. Max Fleischer tolerated this shift because it kept production moving. Dave Fleischer's direction emphasized speed over nuance. The clown's body no longer resisted transformation. It accepted it instantly. That instant compliance is what modern viewers find uncomfortable. There is no friction, no recovery. Rubber hose motion turned Koko into a flexible symbol, rather than a character with limits. Animation historians note that this abstraction made replacement easier when sound-era mascots arrived. Identity blurred into function. Koko moved, therefore he existed. The choice solved immediate problems while quietly hollowing the character from within, and once that identity softened, it could not be restored easily. Fact 11. The silent-era visual tricks that looked dreamlike and read uncomfortably now. Koko's 1929 visuals leaned heavily on silent-era tricks that no longer felt innocent. Fleischer animators reused dissolves, looping transformations, and impossible perspective shifts developed when sound was absent. These techniques once guided attention without dialogue. With sound encroaching, they became excess. Objects melted, reformed, and ignored physical rules without setup. Staging favored continuous metamorphosis over clarity. This created a dream logic that felt unstable rather than whimsical. Max Fleischer had long embraced surrealism, but by 1929 it served a different purpose. Visual tricks filled time when sound cues failed or budgets thinned. Ink and paint shortcuts amplified the effect. Repeated motions felt hypnotic, even claustrophobic. Modern viewers often describe these sequences as uncanny, though that term didn't exist then. Animation historian Esther Leslie has linked Fleischer surrealism to modernist visual culture rather than child entertainment. Koko drifts through spaces that never settle. There is no establishing normal. That absence creates discomfort because the animation never reassures the viewer. Silent-era tricks linger too long, repeating until meaning dissolves. What once solved narrative problems now exposes fragility. The dream never ends. It just loops, and that looping reveals more than the studio likely intended at the time. Fact 12. The creative conflict between Max Fleischer and Dave Fleischer in the late Inkwell years. By 1929, the Fleischer brothers were no longer pulling in the same direction creatively. Max Fleischer controlled patents, processes, and studio systems, including the rotoscope legacy tied to Koko. Dave Fleischer handled direction, pacing, and day-to-day production flow. As sound disrupted schedules, those roles clashed. Max prioritized technical control and contractual survival. Dave pushed for speed, spectacle, and immediate impact. Internal tension surfaced in how Koko was staged. Shorts emphasized rapid escalation rather than structured build-up. Rotoscope discipline loosened against Max's earlier preferences. Animation historians have noted that this period shows inconsistent tone across releases, suggesting uneven leadership alignment. There is no record of open confrontation in studio memos, but production patterns reveal compromise under strain. Koko became the casualty of that divide. Neither brother fully defended the character's identity. Each solved different problems. The result feels fragmented. The clown shifts purpose from short to short, never settling. That instability reflects leadership conflict translated into animation decisions. Koko was not redesigned, he was negotiated. And negotiated characters rarely emerge intact from pressure like that without leaving scars behind. Fact 13. The money squeeze that forced faster animation and riskier decisions decisions. By late 1929, money dictated nearly every animation choice surrounding Koko. Sound conversion required new equipment, technicians, and testing, all while Paramount payments remained fixed. Fleischer Studios could not slow output without risking distribution slots. Budgets tightened at the frame level. Animators were pushed to reduce drawings per second while maintaining apparent motion. This forced aggressive timing, snap transitions, and exaggerated rubber hose arcs. Risk replaced refinement. Max Fleischer approved these compromises to keep cash flowing. Dave Fleischer's production oversight emphasized completion over correction. There was no margin for rework. Ink and paint departments felt the squeeze first, but it radiated outward. Background complexity dropped. Motion loops extended. Experimental staging filled gaps left by missing labor. Animation historians point out that this era marks a shift from innovation-driven risk to survival-driven risk. Koko's shorts feel tense because they were made under compression. Every frame carried financial weight. The clown's relentless motion reflects a studio that could not pause. Stopping meant falling behind. Falling behind meant losing bookings. Money pressure did not kill Koko instantly. It hollowed him out over months, and by the time the damage was visible, the studio had already moved on to the next solution. Fact 14. Why? 1929. Koko still feels like a cartoon that didn't get the memo to behave. Koko's discomfort endures because he was never recalibrated for the future arriving around him. In 1929, animation was standardizing fast under sound, branding, and cleaner character logic. Koko resisted by accident. He carried silent-era surrealism, rotoscope residue, and rubber hose abstraction into a system that wanted order. Fleischer Studios did not formally retire him, they sidelined him. That quiet removal preserved the tension inside these shorts. Nothing was resolved on screen. Koko never learned restraint, never gained a stable voice, never softened his edges. Animation historians often describe him as transitional, but that term understates the effect. Transitional figures expose seams. They show process, pressure, and failure openly. Modern viewers sense that exposure. The clown moves like something unfinished, not in design, but in purpose. He belongs to no stable rule set. That makes him powerful and uncomfortable. Unlike later mascots engineered for longevity, Koko absorbed chaos and reflected it back. The animation does not reassure. It does not apologize. It simply keeps moving, as if unaware the rules changed without him. And that unresolved presence is why Koko still feels like a risk rather than a relic. Even now, Koko the Clown survives not as comfort, but as evidence. These 1929 shorts expose a studio under pressure, a medium mutating too fast, and a character left behind by design. Sound, money, and fear reshaped animation, and Koko absorbed the damage without protection. That's why he still unsettles. He isn't broken. He's unfinished history, moving endlessly through frames that never learned how to let him stop.